Hey y'all, welcome to Ouachita Parish History with Dara. I'm so glad you could join me today. So today we are going to look at some of the history around the Pargoud Indian Mound. And this is something that my mom had gone and seen in previous years. She had told me about it, but I'd never gone and seen it for myself until this past year. And as I was doing research for my class, I was like, well, I have to go see it for myself. And I didn't realize it is literally in the middle of town, over off of Pargoud Boulevard. And it's literally some of our nicest houses in the middle of Monroe are around this Indian Mound, which is so cool. So one of the articles that I'd found some information about the Pargoud Indian Mound is from an article that Jenny Ellerby had written. And so I'm just going to read you some excerpts from that. Just because of their research, it's their research. I'm just, come along behind them and seeing some things. So anyway, in her research, she said one of the earliest references to the site was in 1787, which listed that there were originally 3 mounds, but 2 mounds had been destroyed. Then in 1909, the archaeologist C.B. Moore published Antiquities of the Ouachita Valley and wrote about Pargoud Landing that the mound, evidently domiciliary, had suffered through wash of rain. It was not dug into by us. So they didn't dig into it. And then it had obviously washed, the earth had washed away. So then in 1935, it was excavated by Ford and Freeman, who noted that the site included at least 2 mounds. A portion of the site was bulldozed in 1973, and skeletons and associated grave goods were exhumed by amateurs, which is tragic. The site was excavated again during the summers of the mid to late 1970s by Glenn Green from what was then Northeast Louisiana University, now currently ULM. A collection of artifacts is on display at the ULM Museum of Natural History. And if you haven't seen it, you should go see it. So the tallest mound at the site was estimated to be 28 feet tall. It's thought to be that an early Plaquemine site built around AD 1200. So that's the history that she was able to get from articles by Dr. Diane Greenlee, who's down at Poverty Point. Every time that she mentions it to anybody, she says people always tell her their stories about what they did. They would ride their bikes over the mound or slide down it on pieces of cardboard. So pretty crazy. You'll see the picture of it. I'll have that in the video. And then Laura Peppers, who is just such a treasure to our area. She is in the genealogy department of the Ouachita Parish Library. And she really has just done such excellent work of going through old newspapers and old just history of the area. And she just is so great at writing stories about it and telling about all the neat things about Monroe. And so she's really who struck my interest in Monroe's, because listening to her. So she wrote for the Louisiana Road Trips in 2010 about the Pargoud Indian Mound. And she said you go down Island Drive where Bayou Désert meets the Ouachita River, where there's this small Indian mound. It is 400 feet north of Upper Pargoud Plantation on land originally owned by Hippolyte Pargoud, who's one of our founding father type people. On down the road though. In the 1800s, it was a picnic spot for Monroe residents. They would climb aboard a steamboat and dock at Pargoud Landing. And then festivities would last into the night. Isn't that so interesting? So in the mid-70s, the mound was excavated by Dr. Glenn Green, a professor at ULM, and his archaeology students, which that would be so fun to do. And then they found beads and pottery and arrowheads, but no human remains. That was a deep disappointment for some local residents who had been told a story of a beautiful Indian maiden named Ouachita, like Wichita, who had fallen in love with Juan Artigo, a Spanish explorer. So let's hear this story about the Spanish explorer. So in 1887, Judge A.A. Gunby wrote one of his many poems and published it in the newspaper, and it was called The Legend of the Pargoud Mound. In it, he recites the tale of Ouachita and Ortega. The poem begins by talking about the parties that were held around the mound. And he says, under the walnut trees that grow around the mound we often share, with sturdy men and ladies fair, at dinners, fries, and picnics rare. And then he begins to tell the story. Something more than 300 years have passed since daring Narvaez and his bold band of volunteers in Indian warfare met their death, saved Juan Ortega, who was taken a prisoner when the rest was slain. Gunby describes Juan in the poem as a man of, quote, fine physique and comely face. His brow was broad, his frame was grand, and full of rich Hidalgian grace. His long dark locks were just too nice, his soft mustache was certainly, and all the joys of paradise were centered in his fine goatee. So Ortega was about to be burned at the stake when the fair Ouachita exclaimed, "Oh, spare the prisoner, Father Wise. 'Twill to your name more honor give, to let the conquered humble live." So it's kind of like Pocahontas. Ouachita was in love with the young man. It seemed her love was returned. And it says, now Juan was neither saint nor fool, but fell in love at once himself and married her by Indian rule. His Spanish wife laid on the shelf. So he got rid of his Spanish wife. The two lived happily together until Hernando de Soto came through the area to hunt for priceless pearls and gold, and Juan skipped out to search for fame and wealth with those marauders bold. Poor Ouachita began to pine away, and her father, Ouachita, tried to lift her spirits, but the inevitable happened. Ouachita wandered far and wide and clothed her well in bison's hide and tried to rouse her family pride, but still she wasted in her youth and showed to all the fatal truth. When spring was fairest, her spirit rose above her frame and all its woes. They built for her this Pargoud mound and made it ever sacred ground. So if you want to see the complete poem, which apparently is much longer, go by the Ouachita Parish Library's genealogy room, and you can look at the microfilm of the Monroe Morning Post, July 28, 1929, on page 3. So, and you could go there and speak to Laura Peppers, and she would help you. So, very interesting Pargoud Indian Mound. You've got to go drive by and see it. Obviously, it's in a neighborhood next to really fancy houses. So you don't want to be obnoxious. You don't want to climb on it. It is definitely in somebody's yard. But it is so interesting, and it's worth it. You can take your kids. They would love it. You've got to go do it. So let me tell you another, while we're on the topic of Native American Indians that lived in our area. So, and I'll probably put up a picture of this group photo of a school class that was taken on a grassy knoll in Monroe about 1915, and they think that that picture could have been taken on the Pargoud Indian Mound. So I'll put that up. And then I'll also put up the Upper Pargoud Plantation House. It's considered one of the oldest houses in Ouachita Parish, and it's at the end of Island Drive, which is right by the Indian Mound. It was built by Hippolyte Pargoud, one of Monroe's first wealthy planters and merchants. And so it's a really neat house. You can drive by that too, but people live there, so don't go messing with people's stuff. You could just be like, oh cool, that's the the Upper Pargoud Plantation House. So there's also the Breard family, which we are going to say their name a bunch as we go through this because they are very much woven in the fabric of Monroe. They had some stories, and so they actually wrote a book about the stories of their family. And there's also some in Tales Along the Ouachita, which is a book by, I think Ken Purcell wrote that. So one of the stories was by Sylvester Breard, and he's telling the story about his grandfather, Daniel Armand Breard Sr. So you'll see there's things named in our town, Breard, and there's also things named Armand. They're probably named after their family. So definitely the Breard part is. I'm not sure about the Armand. But he says, my grandfather, Daniel Armand Breard Sr., tells me how he played with Choctaw Indian boys during the 1840s. As we visited the corner of Riverside and Hudson Lane with its large sycamore tree, he said, I played with little Indians here. Every 3 or 4 months, the Choctaws from Logtown would come by canoe to Monroe. They camped right here where the Hudson house is. And so it was the E.M. Hudson and Miss F.G. Hudson that owned that house. They camped right here for the purpose of trading with the settlers. I played with the Indian boys all the time they were here. As was custom, says I, or say I, punctuated his sentence endings. So that, he'd say, like I said this. So we made blowguns and bows and arrows. My pa, Armand Gorville Breard, your great-grandfather, would give me corn to exchange for the beautiful baskets they made. I can remember Daddy could buy a buckskin for 4 bits. So anybody that's heard the chant, 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits $1. So 4 bits, he could buy a buckskin for 4 bits. He would cut it into shoelaces for us boys, and they lasted for years. Grandpa told me that many of the rural residents dressed in buckskins during the 1840s. So that's a pretty cool firsthand experience of one of our founding fathers. And then also, because of the Indians and Native Americans that lived in our area, that caused some friction with the settlers. The settlers are coming into their territory, and some people are getting along and some people are not getting along. So all the way back at the very beginning of the Monroe beginning, which we'll talk more about this later in other videos, that Fort Miro was built. And it was finished in February of 1791, and the whole purpose of it was to protect the early settlers from the Choctaw, Ouachita, and Natchez Indian attacks. Fort Miro is primarily used by women and children of the area, since the men would have to travel several miles away to hunt and fish for the colony. It was named Miro after one of the Spanish governors, and the fort was sold to the United States as part of the Louisiana Purchase. Downtown Monroe is the site, the location of the old fort. So basically, like where the courthouse is in Monroe is where the old fort was. And so there's actually there's a marker under one of the oak trees. If you go right by the Ouachita River, you can see there's a marker that marks the place of where Fort Miro was a long time ago. So anyway, that's all I have today on the Pargoud Indian Mound. And I hope that was interesting to you. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. If I know the answer, I'll send you an answer. If not, no worries. You can actually reach out to Laura Peppers or to anybody at the Ouachita Parish genealogy department, because they are just a wealth of information. So anyway, hope y'all have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.